Michael Jordan didn't just beat him in practice. According to his own teammates, he broke him, on purpose, every single day, for an entire season. He was the third overall pick in the 1987 NBA draft, picked ahead of Reggie Miller, picked ahead of Scottie Pippen, a college legend who still holds a scoring record that stood for almost 40 years. Everything pointed to stardom. Instead, 5 years later, his NBA career was simply over. And the reason why involves a coach who never believed in him, an agent whose one bad bet cost him everything, and a Chicago locker room where he became something no top 3 pick ever wants to be, a living practice dummy for the most competitive athlete the sport has ever produced. There's a story from those Bulls practices that's become basketball legend. The one day everything flipped and his own teammates carried him off the floor like he'd just won a championship. But that moment didn't save his career. It might have made things so much worse. This is the story of Dennis Hopson, the man ahead of Pippen who never got the credit, the champion who barely played, and the career that got stunted before it ever really had a chance to grow. Stick around, because what happened to him in Sacramento is the part almost nobody talks about. The third overall pick in the 1987 NBA draft. In that single moment, nobody in the basketball world had any doubts. This was a franchise-altering talent, a player who was supposed to walk into whatever locker room he landed in and immediately become the cornerstone everything else got built around. That's simply what a top 3 selection meant back then, and it's what it still means today. You don't get picked that high unless people in positions of real power believe you're capable of carrying an organization on your shoulders for the next decade. And yet, just 5 seasons later, it was over. 5 seasons, and Dennis Hopson's time in the National Basketball Association had quietly come to an end. So what actually happened here? Was this a story about a coach who never gave him a fair shot, someone who made decisions behind closed doors that permanently altered the direction of his career? Was it a story about an agent who put personal leverage ahead of his client's future, gambling with a career that didn't have room for gambling? Or was the truth even harder to accept, that Dennis Hopson simply wasn't built to survive sharing a position with 2 of the most dominant, most competitive players the sport has ever produced? There are far more open questions surrounding Dennis Hopson's career than there are clean answers. But one fact remains beyond dispute. When a franchise spends a top 3 pick on you, the expectations that come attached to that decision are enormous. You're not just expected to contribute, you're expected to be the guy who changes everything. Today, decades later, most casual fans don't actually remember Dennis Hopson for what he did on the basketball court at all. Instead, his name survives in NBA history almost exclusively as a trivia answer. The player selected ahead of players who would go on to define entire eras of the league. Ahead of Mark Jackson, ahead of Reggie Miller, ahead of Kenny Smith, and ahead of Scottie Pippen. A player taken just 2 picks after him in that same 1987 draft. A player whose path would later collide with Hopson's in one of the most painful, most humbling ways imaginable. To understand exactly how a top 3 pick turned into a cautionary tale, a career now remembered as stunted growth, we first have to rewind the clock. We have to go back to a time before any of the doubt, before any of the disappointment. Back to the years when Dennis Hopson wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. He was the story. He was, without question, a king of college basketball. Long before scouts started whispering his name, before draft boards and mock rankings, Dennis Hopson was just a kid out of Toledo, Ohio, a city that doesn't always get mentioned in the same breath as basketball hotbeds like Chicago or New York, but that produced, in him, one of the most physically gifted high school players anyone in the area had seen in years. By all accounts, he was a genuine star at the high school level, blessed with an athletic profile that stood out even by the standards of that era, long, explosive, and confident in a way that made grown men in the stands take notice. That talent was enough to earn him a scholarship to Ohio State, and for Hopson, the decision to stay close to home wasn't complicated at all. This was a place he already felt connected to, a place where he expected to feel comfortable from day one. But comfort, as it turned out, was the exact opposite of what was waiting for him when he arrived on campus. As a freshman, Hopson found himself buried on the depth chart, playing behind the team's leading scorer, a future NBA champion, and in one of basketball's quieter injustices, a legendary all-star snub named Tony Campbell. Campbell was already the unquestioned engine of that Ohio State offense, and there simply wasn't room for a freshman, no matter how talented, to step into the spotlight. Hopson had to wait his turn, had to watch from the bench, had to learn what it felt like to not be the best player in the gym for the first time in his life. Then, as a sophomore, the situation didn't get much easier. This time, standing in his way was a 7-footer named Brad Sellers, a dominant interior presence who commanded touches and attention that left Hopson once again playing a supporting role rather than the leading one. 2 years. 2 seasons of watching, waiting, adjusting to a level of discomfort he had never experienced before in his basketball life. For most players, that kind of extended wait can be exactly where careers quietly stall out, where raw talent gets buried under frustration, where confidence erodes instead of building. The toughest thing any basketball player can be asked to do is perform at a high level in a situation where they don't feel comfortable. Talented players can push through that discomfort and still reach the sport's highest levels, but it demands an extraordinary amount of focus, patience, and quiet, unglamorous work that nobody in the stands ever actually sees. Dennis Hopson did the work, and when his junior season finally arrived, everything changed at once. The comfort he'd been missing for 2 full years came rushing back, and along with it came performances that started lighting up scouting reports across the entire country. For the first time in his college career, Dennis Hopson wasn't just a name buried in a rotation. He was a name NBA front offices were beginning to circle on their draft boards. But this newfound comfort, this sudden rise to stardom, was about to come with a price nobody could have warned him about. Because the very thing that made him so dangerous in college, the freedom, the trust, the green light to simply be the best player on the floor every single night, was about to become something the NBA would never fully give him back. His junior season had opened the door, but it was his senior year at Ohio State where Dennis Hopson didn't just walk through that door, he kicked it wide open. By that point, Brad Sellers had already moved on to the NBA, clearing the way for Hopson to finally become the unquestioned centerpiece of the Buckeyes offense. And the timing couldn't have worked out better. The 1986-87 season marked the very first year college basketball introduced the three-point line, a brand new weapon that plenty of established scorers around the country struggled to incorporate into their games. Dennis Hopson didn't struggle with it at all. He adapted to it almost instantly, as if he'd been shooting from that distance his entire life. The numbers that season were staggering: 29 points a game, 8 rebounds a night, 41% shooting from beyond the newly introduced arc, on 5 attempts a game, a shooter's efficiency at a volume most players simply couldn't sustain. Those numbers were good enough to rank him among the top 2 scorers in the entire country, matching him against the very best players college basketball had to offer that year. As the hometown kid with athleticism that jumped off the screen, Hopson shot the ball with total freedom, total confidence, on an Ohio State team that rode that offense all the way to the second round of the NCAA tournament. They ran into the eventual #1 overall seed, Georgetown, in that round, a Georgetown team loaded with talent and depth, and lost by just 3 points. 3 points against the best team in the country. It was close enough to make you wonder what might have happened with just 1 or 2 more possessions going the other way. When the dust settled on that season, Dennis Hopson had done something no player in Ohio State history had ever done before him. He finished as the school's all-time leading scorer with 2,096 career points, a number that decades later still stands as the record. Almost 40 years have passed since that season ended, and no Buckeye has managed to top it. He left college as a 6'5", battle-tested, tournament-tested scorer, with athletic tools comparable to any player of his generation, and a level of confidence that told him this success was going to translate directly to the next level. And it's easy to understand why NBA franchises agreed with him. The New Jersey Nets, a team desperately in need of shoring up an injury-plagued backcourt, looked at everything Dennis Hopson had just accomplished and made the decision to reach all the way up to the 3rd overall pick to make him theirs. It felt, at that moment, like the natural next chapter in an already remarkable story. A dominant college career, a franchise record, a top 3 selection in the NBA draft. Everything appeared to be lining up exactly the way it was supposed to. But what Dennis Hopson didn't yet understand, standing on that draft stage in his brand new cap, was that the very comfort that had just carried him to a school record and a top 3 selection was about to disappear the moment he stepped onto an NBA court for the very first time. And what waited for him on the other side of that transition would test him in ways that no college scoring record could have possibly prepared him for. Dennis Hopson's very first taste of life in the NBA came with a reality check that no scouting report could have fully prepared him for. Suddenly, the freedom he'd enjoyed at Ohio State, the green light to shoot whenever he wanted, the trust that came with being the unquestioned best player on the floor, was gone. In its place was a crowded depth chart, with a number of established players ahead of him at both shooting guard and small forward, all fighting for the same minutes, the same shots, the same opportunities he'd taken for granted in college. And then there were the smaller details, the kind that never show up in a highlight reel but end up mattering more than almost anything else. The NBA three-point line sat noticeably farther back than the college arc he dominated from just months earlier. It sounds like a minor adjustment on paper. In practice, it was a problem Dennis Hopson would spend his entire career trying, and ultimately failing, to fully solve. His rookie season reflected all of that uncertainty: limited minutes, limited opportunities, a player still trying to figure out exactly where he fit inside a system that didn't revolve around him anymore. But by his second season, something shifted. The Nets started to see flashes of exactly why they'd reached up to grab him at third overall in the first place. With a little more trust, a little more room to operate, Dennis Hopson began to look like a legitimate NBA scorer. He averaged almost 13 points a game that year, starting 36 contests compared to just 19 as a rookie. Real, tangible growth. The kind that suggested the Nets hadn't made a mistake after all. That growth continued into year 3, where his scoring average climbed to nearly 16 points a game. On paper, this was a young player developing exactly the way a franchise hopes a former top 3 pick will develop. Steady, season-over-season improvement, more responsibility, more trust, more production. But basketball, especially at the professional level, is never just about the numbers on the stat sheet. Heading into the 1989-90 season, the roster around Hopson had already started to shift. Key veteran pieces had been traded away or had simply moved on from the organization. And in that same pivotal third season, Dennis Hopson found himself playing for his third different head coach in as many years, a level of instability that would make it difficult for any young player to build consistency, let alone one still trying to establish himself in the league. This particular coach, though, wasn't just another face in a revolving door. This was Bill Fitch, and the relationship between Bill Fitch and Dennis Hopson would end up defining the next chapter of his career in ways neither of them could have predicted. According to Hopson himself, he and Fitch simply never saw eye to eye. They didn't get along, not even a little, and at the center of that tension was something far more damaging than a simple personality clash. Fitch, according to Hopson, never actually believed he was the franchise's long-term answer at his position, not even while Hopson was putting up the best numbers of his career, not even while he was, statistically, the team's leading scorer. That lack of belief from the man calling the shots would end up shaping everything that happened next. Because behind Bill Fitch's blessing, Dennis Hopson was about to walk directly into the single most damaging chapter of his entire NBA career, one that would take him from a rising young scorer in New Jersey straight into the most psychologically brutal environment a young player could possibly be dropped into. Bill Fitch and the New Jersey Nets front office eventually reached a decision that, from a pure business standpoint, made complete sense on paper. Hopson's numbers were strong enough to make him valuable trade bait, even if his overall game hadn't quite developed into what the franchise had originally envisioned when they took him third overall. So the front office made the call. It was time to move him. Trades happen. That's simply the nature of professional sports, and Hopson understood that as well as anyone. But looking back, he has always maintained that where he specifically ended up being sent wasn't just business as usual. He believes it was a direct consequence of his broken relationship with Bill Fitch, and that it landed him in what may have been the single worst possible situation his career could have placed him in. To understand why, you have to understand what actually made Dennis Hopson thrive as a player in the first place. Throughout his entire life, from high school through his senior year at Ohio State, Hopson had only ever succeeded in environments where he had a real, significant role. He needed to feel like the team was built, at least in part, around what he could do. He wanted to be a star. He wanted to prove that the franchise which had reached up to grab him at third overall had made the right call. Instead, he was traded directly into the Chicago Bulls organization. A team already built entirely around one player, a player named Michael Jordan, who at that exact point in his career was coming off 4 consecutive seasons averaging 30 points a game or better, a level of individual dominance the sport had rarely, if ever, seen before. According to Hopson's own teammates on that Bulls roster, what happened next in practice, day after day, was nothing short of psychologically brutal. Jordan matched up against him constantly in scrimmages, and according to those same teammates, systematically dismantled whatever confidence Hopson had left. This wasn't an accident either. This was, by design, exactly what Phil Jackson and the Bulls coaching staff had brought Hopson in to do. They needed someone close to Jordan's height and athletic profile who could push him, challenge him, pressure him relentlessly in every single drill, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 5-on-5, whatever the format, day after day after day. And Michael Jordan knew precisely what that arrangement meant. He took full advantage of it every single time he stepped on the practice floor. There's one particular story from that era that's become something of legend among people who followed that Bulls team closely. One day, in a practice scrimmage, Hopson actually got the better of Jordan and won the game outright. His teammates, in celebration, carried him off the practice floor on their shoulders as if the team had just won an actual NBA Finals game, rather than an internal scrimmage that meant nothing on paper. It's not hard to imagine what the mood was like in that gym for the rest of that particular week. And Jordan wasn't the only obstacle standing in Hopson's way on that roster. At small forward, Chicago also had Scottie Pippen, the very same Scottie Pippen selected just 2 picks after Hopson back in the 1987 draft, now coming off the first of what would eventually become 7 career All-Star selections. It's not difficult to imagine that Pippen, too, relished every single opportunity to go up against the player chosen ahead of him, to personally demonstrate, night after night, that the decision to pass him over had been exactly the mistake so many people already believed it to be. Hopson did walk away from that season in Chicago with something most players in the sport's history never get to experience, an NBA championship ring. But by his own admission, he knew, even in the moment, that the trade to Chicago represented a massive step backward in his development as a player. In his own words, he averaged a little over 4 minutes a game with the Bulls. 4 minutes. Minutes he described in his own terms as genuinely difficult to even find. Where exactly was Dennis Hopson supposed to get consistent playing time on a roster like that? The honest answer was, he wasn't. There simply wasn't room. Just 2 games into his second season in Chicago, having logged a grand total of 5 minutes on the floor across those 2 games combined, Hopson finally got the news he'd been quietly hoping for. The Bulls had agreed to a trade that would send him west, to the Sacramento Kings, away from the exhausting, ego-crushing environment that playing behind Michael Jordan had become for him. Sacramento, at least on paper, represented a fresh start, and in a lot of ways it genuinely was one. But even there, things still weren't quite what Hopson had once dreamed of back in his senior season at Ohio State. He found himself logging around 18 minutes a game, settling into a full-time role off the bench, playing behind 2 established scorers in Lionel Simmons and Mitch Richmond. Still, within those 18 minutes, Dennis Hopson made an immediate impact. He became a reliable source of instant offense off the bench, scoring around 10 points a game for a Kings organization that genuinely valued what he brought to the roster. Unlike Chicago, where he'd been little more than Michael Jordan's daily practice opponent, Sacramento actually wanted him there. They saw him as part of the franchise's future, not just a body to fill out the end of the bench. For the first time since college, it looked like Dennis Hopson had finally found a stable, sustainable home in the NBA. But there's another crucial element to building a lasting career as a professional athlete, one that has nothing to do with talent, work ethic, or even the team you happen to be playing for. It's the people you choose to represent you off the court. And according to Hopson himself, looking back on his entire career with the benefit of hindsight, this was the one area where he made a decision that would end up costing him everything. After the 1991-92 season, Dennis Hopson would never play another game in the NBA again. As he explains it, the reason wasn't injury, and it wasn't a decline in his play. It was his agent, who chose to hold out for more money during contract negotiations with the Kings, betting that Sacramento would eventually cave and meet his demands. Instead, the Kings called that bluff completely. They simply pulled their offer off the table and walked away. In the end, Dennis Hopson did end up signing a contract worth more money than what Sacramento had originally offered him, but that contract came from a team in Spain, not anywhere in the NBA. He became, in his own words, trapped inside the overseas basketball system, a talented American player who slowly, year by year, turned into a forgotten name on NBA front office boards back home. He played from 1992 all the way through the year 2000, traveling across Europe, building an entire second career on a different continent, while his NBA career quietly, permanently became a thing of the past. Looking back on it now, Hopson recognizes that decision, the choice to hold out rather than sign what was actually on the table, as the wrong one. And to this day, he places the blame for that advice squarely on the agent who was supposed to be protecting his interests, bringing it up every single chance he gets in interviews. When you step back and look at the entire arc of Dennis Hopson's career, all at once, a more complicated picture starts to emerge than the simple label of draft bust that's often attached to his name. Yes, it wasn't the career anyone expected when the Nets reached up to take him third overall back in 1987, but consider everything he actually accomplished along the way. He was the best player on a nationally ranked NCAA tournament team. He became the all-time leading scorer in Ohio State history, a record that still stands today, decades later. He was selected in the top 3 of an NBA draft, one of only a handful of players in any given year to ever hear their name called that early. He led an NBA franchise in scoring. He played alongside and learned directly from arguably the greatest basketball player who has ever lived. And he walked away from his career with something the overwhelming majority of professional athletes across every sport will never get to experience: an NBA championship ring. No, it wasn't the ending Dennis Hopson had once imagined for himself, back when he was lighting up scoreboards as a senior at Ohio State. But it's still a career filled with accomplishments that most basketball players, at any level, can only ever dream about. And that, in itself, is something worth remembering. Still, for all of these reasons combined, the coaching instability, the trade to Chicago, the agent who bet wrong at exactly the wrong moment, Dennis Hopson's growth as a professional basketball player was, without question, stunted. Cut short by a combination of circumstances that were only ever partially within his own control.